זה אני לא יודע, לשם הפוליטיקות והרכילויות לא משפיע. לא יודע, אולי, האמת שאני לא יודע כמה אנשים משתמשים בזה, לא יודע כמה ההצעה מלאה. אני לא לוקח לפעמים דורות שאני שהוא הרבה פעמים מגיע עם הרכב, בטח שהוא צריך להגיע גם לארץ שפים יותר מתחבר, כמו למשל בימי שני לדעתי. לא, בעצם לא כשמדובר על המפגש הזה, אני חושב שיש משהו אחרי זה. אז תגידי, יש לך מושג למה נצטרך את המפגש משבוע הבא?
אולי כי... מה? כי זה שבוע הבא? זה לא...
סופקת עליי?
זה לא...
אז לא שבוע, לא הודיעו לך?
לא, רגע.
הוא הודיע את זה לא למחר, לשבוע הבא בשעה אחת.
wait. כן. הוא שלח מייל, אבל הבנתי שהתאימו את זה לאחת, לא הבנתי שזה היה שבוע הבא.
שינו גם את התאריך, 99%.
נכון. ואז גם כתבתי מייל לעבודה, כתבתי לו שתקדים את ההגנה על התזה.
אני התמקלת, אבל אני בעצם רוצה לשבת שם.
שנקדים את זה בשבוע. זה דווקא בטלפון. כן, קבלנו לשני, אבל אני חשבתי שזה
טוב, אני לא לגמרי משוכנעת שאני אשתמש בו, כי כשהתברר לי שבסתם האנשים הוא כ-20, אז אני יכולת שאני אעשה את זה פחות פורמלי, אבל זה נמצא, אני אכתוב את זה תחת קורניה. אני מניחה שהרוב מכירים, אני לא מכירה אותה, אז אני אגיד אותם. את יכולה לנו? אין זה נקרא יש גדול חמות פרדסי כאילו גם זאת הייתה? אוקיי, אני חושבת שזה קוגניציה? זה. בדיוק קראו לשיעור הקודם את הפרק הזה שאני מדבר עליהם.
למה יש פה את הפרק השני?
אז נורא קצת שיעור ראשון, כדי שבשבילה זו שיטה של ברר לראות קבוצה בהקשר הזה. כרגע לא תכננו שיקרו. מאוד אינטרודקטורי, שתי המערכות
הנובל ניתן על עבודה שנעשתה הרבה לפני הסיסטם והשקיעו לא כשעבודה נעשתה קודם שנעשתה בזמן ההצגה המחשבה במונחי טו סיסטם זה הייתה כזה שישה עשרה כלומר ממני למשל קרה על מה קיבלנו לא, ואני אומרת לך שזה אוקיי טוב, אז בואי תקליטו. לא, את יודעת מה? תני לי את הדבר שבו אני רואה את כל היתר. לא.
אולי
זה גדול, אבל אני רואה את הקטנים כדי שיהיה לי קל אם אני רוצה לדלג.
אז את צריכה לעשות עם החצים ממך.
או שפשוט להשים על זה.
כן.
אוקיי. תגידו לי, אתם יודעים מי אני? לא בשם, אלא מעבר לשם? Do you guys know who I am? I don't mean my name. I mean, I was asked whether I should be introduced. Should I? Okay, introduce me. I thought so, because I don't know who you guys are.
Okay, so this is Professor Maya Bar-Hillel, who will give us this lecture. Her research area are decision making and probabilistic inference. conference and all kinds of interesting things that relate to those.
Yeah.
It was very, very short. So maybe you can
Fine.
tell us a bit more.
No, the lecture's not about me. Okay. So, I was told to expect about 20 students, and my eyes tell me that I'm seeing about 20 students, which means that the group is a little. Can this be made to not blind me?
Oh, this is a projector.
So.
Or you mean the light?
No, I meant the projector. So I guess I'll have to stand here because if I stand here, I'm gonna go
Or
blind.
if you don't want the presentation, you can just turn it off. There's a big off button.
I don't know if I'll use my presentation or not. We'll see. I'm going to be informal because you're such a small group. What I often do and will not do is use the audience as subjects in replicating some of the experiments that Kahneman and Tversky did that won them the Nobel. But for that you need, typically, it's based on a comparison of two groups, and typically you need more than 10 people per group if you want to get reliable results. So I'm going to tell you about experiments, and you will have to trust me that when I say a majority of people do such and such, and you're all welcome to consult your own intuition, but I probably I won't separate you into two groups and then have you by a show of hands, have you see how your performance compares with that of the hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who have been subjected to the same questions in the past. Okay, so Eva is your name? Eva just told me that you recently read the first chapter in Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. The first chapter, as far as I recall, is more about two systems in thinking fast and slow than it is about what the topic of my talk is. I'm sorry that I prepared my presentation in Hebrew. I was told that I have to speak in English, but when I prepared it, I actually translated from English to Hebrew because I have these presentations in English in more copies than I have them in Hebrew. But anyway, you probably are all in a position to read this, and if not, doesn't matter. Those who can't read Hebrew will get what they need to get from listening to me. So Merav asked me to tell you about the psychological insights that won a Nobel Prize in economics, and that work was done long before Kahneman began to think in terms of two systems, and even at the time that he got the Nobel, by which time his collaborator Ernest Tversky was no longer alive, and therefore did not participate in the Nobel, because Nobel Prizes are never given posthumously. Some prizes are, Nobels are not. There have been cases when people have died between the declaration of the prize and the endowing of the prize, and then they get the prize. But they do not announce a Nobel winner posthumously. So Tversky did not, we might as well look at them while we're talking about it. So Tversky, this is Kahneman. Have you ever seen him? He comes often to the Hebrew University to lecture. You have. But you probably have not seen Amos, who may have died before some of you were born. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. So this work was done when the two of them were members of the psychology department at the Hebrew University. They continued their collaboration until Amos' death, even though after they left the Hebrew University and went to separate institutions. Tversky went to Stanford University. Kahneman initially went to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and eventually transferred to Princeton University. And by that time, they were also doing some work in this area independently and with other students. In any case, the Nobel-winning work was done in the late 60s and throughout most of the 70s here in Israel. Now, do any of you actually know a bit about what they got the Nobel Prize for? You do, and you know it because it's kind of hard not to know nowadays, or because you've studied it? So why don't you tell me? It's so that I won't cover familiar find lectures by Kahneman online, you can find lectures by me online, you can find lectures by other people online, you can read the papers online. Everything is so available that it wasn't really necessary to bring me here, but since I'm here, let me try to aim for some added value. So why don't you tell me, hi Adrian, so why don't you tell me what you studied?
The background here is very heterogeneous. So some people may have studied, but there are people who never studied about Kahneman.
Okay, so let's do it this way. Who has never heard of the so-called heuristics and biases approach to judgment and decision making? A few of you. Okay. So I guess I will talk to those who don't know, and if I bore those who know, I apologize. So, as I'm sure you know, there is no Nobel Prize given in psychology, but there have been other psychologists who have received Nobel Prizes. Eilon, you can tell me, are Yuval and Wiesel considered psychologists? Yuval and Wiesel? Hubel?
Yeah, he's more than psychologist, but he won the Nobel Prize for physiology.
Right. Those two guys won a Nobel Prize, even though by training they were psychologists. Herb Simon, who won a Nobel Prize in economics before Kahneman and Tversky, even though he was a psychologist too. Let me tell you a word about what Herb Simon won the Nobel Prize for. Herb Simon won his contribution, so to speak, to economic theory was in pointing out that what's called economic man, this fictitious creature that is the subject of economic theory, is endowed by the theory with unlimited mental resources, unlimited memory, unlimited computation ability, unlimited time, and so on. And so this theoretical creature can do a lot of things that economic theory expects him or her to do because you abstract the human limitations. And what Simon did primarily was say, but real people are subject to these limitations. Memory is finite, time is finite, energy is finite, resources are attention is finite, resources are finite. So he did economic theory subject to limited resource. And the principles he talked about was he replaced the notion of optimization by the notion of satisficing, and he said people neither strive for nor are they capable of achieving optimal solutions to economic questions. They settle for satisfactory solutions. Something has to be good enough. It doesn't necessarily have to be the best, among other reasons because we don't have the wherewithal to find out what is the best and go for the best. But subject to these limitations, the economic theory he did was quite orthodox. Now another person who never won a Nobel Prize in anything and wouldn't be even a candidate was Freud, who talked before Kahneman, as you know from reading the chapter, who talked about the role of the unconscious in the human psyche, but in a completely different manner than the role the unconscious plays primarily in System 1. And I guess if you read the chapter, I don't have to go too much into the differences between System 1 and 2. So both what Simon did and what Freud did can be seen as antecedents of what Kahneman and Tversky did, but not really, because Kahneman and Tversky did not say that humans are Homo economicus, are this ideal creature subject to finite limitations. They said, in fact, this is quite a different creature. Yes, sure, this creature has finite resources, but this creature does not in other ways emulate economists. And the fact that a lot of what we do is unconscious and not deliberate and not open to introspection or therefore to executive control is not, as Freud said, because it is dark and threatening and holds things that we repress and that threaten our well-being, but simply because the cognitive apparatus is such that a lot lot of what goes on out of awareness, and it's not necessarily dark or anything like that. Okay, so what was the psychological contribution that made it worthwhile for the Nobel Committee to think that this warranted a Nobel Prize in economics? So what this Kahneman and Tversky essentially did is that they went against, one could say, the reigning paradigm in theories of human decision-making in general, and in particular economic decision-making, although what they said goes well beyond the boundaries of economic decision-making. In fact, by the time that they came on the scene, economic theory was going way beyond traditional economic variables. So economic theory started with with economic variables such as time and labor and money, and economists long before Kahneman and Tversky were already dealing with variables such as hope and despair and ambition and family relations and lots of things that don't seem to be traditional economic variables. But the reigning theory of decision under uncertainty was laid out in this book from the 1950s, Theory of Games in Economic Behavior. John von Neumann was a mathematician, Oskar Morgenstern was an economist, and they laid out what's called utility theory. And we will not go into utility theory. I will, however, tell you who does utility theory. The creatures who do utility theory, as I said, it's called Homo economicus, and Richard Thaler, one of the founding fathers of what's known today as behavioral economics, introduced the word econ as opposed to human. So the creature that this theory was about was this idealized, rational creature. And what Kahneman and Tversky said was that that theory does not apply to flesh and blood, not for the Simon reasons, not because people are finite, not even because they're subject to unconscious processes, but because the cognitive apparatus, the way we are built, the architecture of our mind, does not lend itself to the kind of things that economic theory requires. Let's see now in what ways they challenged it. The theory they offered as an alternative was called prospect theory. It's often translated into Hebrew, like saying this for the benefit of the Hebrew speakers here, as Torah prospecting. I used to fight many years against it because Torah prospecting doesn't tell anybody what prospect theory is, but neither does prospect theory tell anybody what prospect theory is. And Kahneman claims that they were quite deliberate in their choice of a kind of a concept that means very little because A, they didn't want connotations from words that had previously been used. They didn't want the baggage. And B, they wanted something novel to catch the attention. And he thinks that this was a brilliant PR move. He thinks that one reason he got the Nobel Prize in economics is not because of what the theory says, but because he called it prospect theory. But I prefer to call it Torat ha'erech, which is a translation of an early version of what they called their theory, because in fact the function they talked about a function called value, the value function, as opposed to utility function. Now, as I said, I'm not going to teach you utility theory, but I do want to say what are the major differences. Utility is the subjective counterpart, or the answer to the question, if you will, what's in it for me? So in the early years when utility theory was developed, it was because people realized very early on, by very early on I mean theoreticians Bernoulli were already dealing with these things in the 17th century, in the 18th century, that you needed something to capture what's called gambles, what uncertain endeavors, what value they had that couldn't be done by what was the tradition at the time, which is calculate expected value. So suppose, for example, that you are an entrepreneur in the 18th century and you're sending a ship they don't have yet, and for bringing from there things that you don't have yet in Europe. And this is a very high stakes gamble, because if it's successful, a lot of money is involved, and if it's a failure, then you lose everything, including life. How much is that worth? People were taking out insurance already in those days. How much, how much should you pay to insure it? How much should the insurer ask to get for it? It's not one of those things that you can rely on statistics for, because there weren't enough ships being sent that you could just look at large numbers. As I told you, why am I not using the US subject? The number is too small. And the numbers weren't large enough to have statistics, which is what a lot of insurance companies nowadays use to set their premiums. How do you set the value of a gamble like that? As I said, the custom was to do it by expected value, by this numerical thing. It says you multiply the monetary outcome by their probability, and that's the expected value. And it was the thinkers of the day acknowledged that people whose intuitions deviated from expected value were not irrational. They didn't want to say there's something wrong with you, you're not doing things by expected value. So now I'm going to turn you into subject. And I'm going to do it, this is something that doesn't require comparison of two groups. I'm going to do with you the kind of thing that Kahneman and Tversky did with their subjects. They gave them hypothetical scenarios, you'll hear one in a minute. They asked them to think about it a little bit. They didn't give them too much time. Not that these are questions that a lot of time changes the answer. A lot of time can change the answer if you put the question aside and start reading the literature and then give the answer. But if you spend 5 seconds thinking about it, or spend 5 minutes thinking about it, they're not major differences between how you answer. So I'll give you a question, I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and then we'll answer by a show of hands. Let me also tell you that there is evidence to say not only that it doesn't matter that I'm only going to give you a few seconds, it also doesn't matter that this is hypothetical. In other words, if I ask you the same question for real, this is not necessarily true of all questions, but of the questions I'll now be asking you, it's also true because it's been checked. People answer the same whether it's real or not real. One reason being that even if it's for real, you go through your head and think about it for a bit, and then when it's for real, you give an answer and something really happens, and when it's not for real, you give an answer and nothing happens. But you go through the reasoning in your head anyway, and it doesn't seem to matter in these cases whether it's for real or not. So here's the question. Would you be willing to participate right now in the following gamble? I will toss a coin. It can be a coin from your pocket, not from my pocket if you don't trust me. It can be not me tossing it, but designate Elon to toss it, or whoever you want, if you don't trust me. In other words, let's put matter of am I cheating you to the side. Let's take a coin you trust. Let's take a coin tosser you trust, and you can choose which side will be your side and which side will be my side. We'll toss the coin, and if the coin comes up on your side, I will give you 1,000 shekels, and if the toy comes out on my side, you will give me 1,000 shekels. Now, you can think about it, because in a minute I'm going to ask you who wants to do it and who doesn't, but meanwhile I'll continue my patter. Patter, by the way, is very important. Patter is what they call what magicians do, where they do performances and they talk to you. Patter, in the case of magicians, it's how they get your mind off what they want to get and how they direct your attention to the wrong places and so on. Patter, in my case, is because I'm using the patter to engage you in the kind of task that, in fact, Kahneman and Tversky were trying to answer. So it's not an arbitrary choice of mine to choose 1,000. I wanted to choose a number that is large enough that you care, and that is small enough that if you say yes, it's not going to break you. If you're going to say no to me, it's not because paying 1,000 shekels is going to break you. Paying 1,000 shekels, since you're students, I assume it's going to hurt you. Paying 1,000 shekels is going to hurt me, but you can take it if it happens. So you're thinking about it. I suppose you kind of you're imagining.
Joseph. So now Maya pays you 1,000 shekels in cash. By the way, if you lose, I take checks, but I will pay you in cash. Now it comes out on the other side, how do they say in Hebrew? Basta. You really don't like it, okay? The chances are equal. You can gain 1,000 with the same chances as you can lose 1,000. Think about it. There is no right and wrong answer, because here's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you if you want to do it. If I asked you, do you want vanilla milkshake? There's no right and wrong answer to do you want vanilla milkshake. You either want vanilla milkshake or you don't want vanilla milkshake. You either want to do this now with me or you don't want to do this now with me. Let me tell you that it's not just me telling you there's no right or wrong answer. Bernoulli said there's no right or wrong answer. In other words, you probably can see that this gamble has what's called an expected value of 0, which is called in the literature a fair gamble. That outcome to be lost and to be gained is the same. The probabilities are the same. It's fair. It's symmetrical. But whether you like it or not is up to you. So let's see. If this were for real now, if I would be coming by and we'd do this, how many of you would say, let's do it? Raise your hand. And how many would say, no, thank you very much? Okay, this is data, and in this case, I'm not comparing you to anything. I'm comparing you to expected value. But I'm not saying it was wrong of you. You know what, maybe I should have done it. I'll do it now. Would it make a difference if the gain were not 1,000, it were 1,010? I'm going to make it what's called a positive expected value gamble. In other words, now the value, if you calculate expectation, the upside is better than the downside. Who says let's go if it's 1,010 shekels? You're like everybody else. It's not, the reason you said no is not because it was 0 and therefore supposedly either answer is. The reason you said no holds even if I had made it a positive gamble. You don't like it.
Make it 2,000.
Yeah, good point. And in fact, sometimes what I do is indeed increase the gain gradually or decrease the loss gradually. And there is a point at which people flip. And it's not the same point for everybody. And 2 to 1, if I remember from the literature, is about the 50% point. About 50% of subjects more or less like you, at 2,000 to 1,000, about 50% are by now saying yes, 50% are still not. Of course, if I were doing this with you, I would have to make clear that we're not negotiating. In other words, it's not a case where, in fact, you'd be willing to do it for 2,000, but you're holding out for more. No reason to hold out for more, because I'm not going to give you anything. So you can afford to be sincere to yourself and perhaps even to be sincere to me and tell me what your true preference is. Okay, so what my point here is that the fact that you said no, even to a positive expected value gamble, and probably would have said no even if I had raised it not to 2,000, but say to 1,500 based on lots of existing evidence. Most people say no to 1,500 as compared to a loss of 1,000. That fact, Bernoulli said, that fact in itself does not make you irrational. There's no reason why expected value should determine the value of a gamble. And he developed utility theory, which now utility theory here is what I don't know why you're seeing these words. Why are you seeing these words? Click to access. Don't know why. Anyway, Bernoulli's idea was that utility behaves the way that psychophysical functions behave. Do you know the term psychophysical functions? Psychophysical functions are functions that give you, thank you, that give you sort of the psychological or subjective equivalent of changes in some objective external physical variable. So the people who studied psychophysics would study, never mind. This is before the days of PowerPoint. I just used to do this. This is the way the functions work. What is this function? This is a function where when you change something on the x-axis and look at how movement along the X value affects the psychological attitudes towards these things, the function is not linear. When you increase brightness in a room by a factor of 2, people don't realize that it's increased by a factor of 2. When you add when you add 100 grams, if somebody's holding a kilo, they don't know what a kilo looks like, right? They're too young. In our day, Elon and I, you went to the greengrocer, the way they knew what a kilo was is that they put it on a pan balance with a piece of iron weighing the kilo. So supposing you're holding in your hand a piece of iron weighing the kilo, and somebody is going to add 100 grams to it, it feels different than if you're holding a piece of iron weighing 2 kilos and somebody adds 100 grams to it. So a difference of 100 grams is very noticeable when you're holding nothing. It's quite noticeable when you're holding a kilo. It's far less noticeable when you're holding 2 kilos. That's what the psychophysical function describes here. That as you move on the x-axis, the psychological counterpart increases not linearly, but in a diminishing acceleration kind of way. And Bernoulli said the same is true for money. That adding $1,000 to $1,000 is not subjectively the same as adding $1,000 to $10,000. Therefore, I gave you a fair gamble and asked you whether you like it or not, but another classical demonstration of the same thing is to ask people, how much would you, I'm going to toss a coin between nothing on one side and $1,000 on the, or 1,000 shekels on the other side. And again, you bring the coin, you bring the tosser, you tell me which side is worth 1,000 and which is 0. And then I ask you, would you rather participate in this gamble? This is a nice gamble, you can't lose. You can end up with nothing, but you can't lose. I asked you, would you rather take this gamble, or would you rather take 700 shekels? I'm not going to do a show of hands. I'm going to tell you, most people prefer 700 shekels to tossing the coin between 0 and 1,000. לא חוכמה גדולה, because 700 shekels is more than the expected value. But most people prefer 500 shekels to the gamble. In fact, most people prefer 400 shekels to the gamble. In fact, at about 300 shekels, half of the people still prefer 300 shekels to the gamble. And did I do it in the right direction? I guess since I said half, in any direction is right, because half are the other way. In other words, people prefer the sure thing to the gamble, even if it's considerably less than the gamble. And what Bernoulli said is, there's nothing wrong with that, because what's in it for us, when it comes to money, is captured by a function like this and not by a linear function. Now, of course, you have to notice that economically speaking, what you can do with money is linear with money. You can buy twice as many goods for 2,000 shekels as you can buy for 1,000 shekels. You can buy twice as many hours of labor for 2,000 for 1,000. Out there in the market, twice as much money buys twice as much exchange for money. But subjectively speaking, Bernoulli said, if that's not the way you feel about it, if you're willing to work more to increase your salary from 2,000 to 3,000, then you are to increase your salary from 22,000 to 23,000. Bernoulli said that's okay. It seems to me natural. It seems to me that money is no different than other psychophysical functions. Yes?
Yeah. But I think that you do have a phenomenon of diminishing marginal return in terms of money's ability to buy you happiness, let's say. Because, I mean, there are studies that have been done that show, for example, that, the more money that you have, the happier you are up to until you have like $70,000 or something like that. And then, like, having more money doesn't really increase your happiness that much. So in that sense, I think that the psychophysical absolutely does play, or I think that there is a real role of what the utility of the money is to you at different quantities.
Fine. Because in fact you're strengthening what Bernoulli said and what all of economic theory has accepted since then. We're not going to expect the psychophysical functions that connect what's in it for me to money. We're not expecting it to be linear. If it's this shape, you'll just bolster the case I'm gonna tell you what prospect theory, what their value theory suggested instead, but before that I want to tell you a little anecdote. When Dami got the Nobel Prize in economics, they gave him a little party here at the economics department at the Hebrew University. By then, as I said before, Amos was already departed. Amos died in 1996, and the Nobel Prize was given, I believe, in 2002 or 2003. And Kahneman came and met with the economics department, and he said quite startlingly something that he likes to say from time to time, because he likes to startle from time to time. He said, prospect theory is a theory about nothing. And people say to him, what do you mean? I mean, this theory, they got to the Nobel Prize, a theory about nothing. And he said, and this is now literally true, and I'm going to walk you through some of it. He said it's a theory about people's preferences between binary gambles. You don't hear it, but I feel it buzzing in my pocket a little, annoys me. How do I stop this? Don't want to feel the buzz in my pocket. Choice between binary gambles, in other words, gambles with two possible outcomes, like those that I have presented you with so far, only two monetary gambles, like those I gave you, with known probabilities, like those I gave you. And then you take, now how broad is that? In other words, if you're going to be studying decision making, do you want to only talk about binary monetary gambles with known probabilities? No, you want to expand to more than two possible outcomes. Some of the outcomes can be described not in monetary terms, but if you use the term in terms of happiness or other things. And the probabilities may be not numerical ones, not known. You might be in a position to say the probability is better than 50-50, or it's near certainty, or it's quite low, but certainly not known probabilities, and sometimes you can't even say the things I said. So in other words, decision making is about way more than choice between binary monetary gambles with known probability, but that's what prospect theory is about. Now, like in many other areas, you start with floor one, you start with simple building blocks. You may start with binary monetary gambles with known probabilities, and you hope to expand one into other things. So what did value theory say that, or prospect theory, that utility theory didn't say? It's kind of captured in this function, which is the function that appears in their famous 1979 paper, Prospect Theory, which was cited by the Nobel Committee as the theory that won them the prize. And as you see, part of it resembles the function I showed you before, but then there is this these axes, and there is this open beginning point in the axis, and more is going on here. So what is the difference? In utility theory, the carriers of utility, the things that utility was defined on, are what's known as final states of wealth, or finite states of assets. In other words, what carries utility? The position you're in before you take the gamble, after you take the gamble, with the possible outcomes of the gamble. So even though I may ask you, do you or do you not want to toss a coin between 1,000 plus or minus, or what would you rather have, 400 shekels or a coin cost between 0 and 1,000? I ask it that way because I don't know what any of you are worth. But utility theory implicitly assumed that you are translating this question into the following. Well, presently I'm worth W. Fictitious right away, right? Not only didn't it occur to you to think what you're worth, but if it did, you probably wouldn't be, it wouldn't be too easy, I think even for students, it's not too easy to say how much are they worth. And the more you own over the years, not in form of money in the bank, but in form of assets, the harder it is to say what you're worth at a given moment in time. I have no idea what I'm worth right now. I have an idea how much is in my wallet right now. So anyway, the classic theory assumes that you ask yourself myself, okay, right now I'm in position W, stands for well. If I chose the 300 shekels, I would be in position W plus 300. If I chose the gamble, then after the gamble is carried out, I would either still be at W, or I would have W plus 1,000, 50-50. What would I rather? And that's how choice is made. Hanuman and Percy said, not at all. People life presents us choices, typically in terms of these changes to your wealth, the way I presented you with a question that was about changes to your wealth. That's how most decisions are presented. There can be exceptions, but often that's how decisions are presented. And when they are thus presented, people do not translate them into total wealth. They stay with that. So in other words, what they said is, people's preferences and choices are not about final states of wealth. They are about changes in states of wealth. They are about the myopic, if you will, the small scale framing in which the decision was presented for most people. If I had given, instead of 1,000, a much greater number, one that had you lost it might have threatened everything you had, it might have triggered in some of you thoughts that said, hey, she's offering to toss a coin between giving us 100,000 or taking from us 100,000. That's a game changer. If we get 100,000, we're just not going to walk out of here the same people that walked in. Either way, if we lose 100,000, who knows? We may have to stop coming to school and start working. Then you might think about what the influence would be about your total assets, but not when I ask you about something like 1,000 shekels. Certainly not if I ask you something about 10 shekels, which very often textbooks do. They take stakes that are smaller than the one I chose to give you. I wanted the stake that would get, maybe if you were connected to some physiological measures, maybe the thought of it might make you a little bit excited. 10 shekels, most people don't even want to bother to think about it. Some people don't stoop to pick up 10 shekels. Call me if you see 10 shekels. I stoop for 10 shekels. So okay. This 0 point in the axis is what's called the reference point, which often, but not necessarily, is the status quo. It's where you're at now, and it fades into the background. It vanishes. You don't think about it, but it's there. So that's the point from which you calculate what's at stake right now. How am I going to move? Am I going to move here or move there? The second gamble I gave you, where there was nothing to lose, was a choice between moving from where you are to the point, say 400, versus a gamble between staying here and moving all the way to 1,000. And since we've already agreed that 1,000 is not 2.5 times as much on the y-axis as 400, then the curvature of your function can be such that indeed the value to you of 400 is higher than the value of the gamble. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, now what is this limb of the function? This branch of the function is what happens when you are asked questions in the loss domain. Here, when you move from the reference point to the left, you're moving toward losses. You're moving toward places that will end you up with less than you had before facing the decision. Now there, you find a similar curvature, but Kahneman and Tversky said it's steeper. So it has the same general shape with respect, just like this is. I never remember which is convex and which is concave, but just like this is whatever one of the two words is with respect to this. This is the same with respect to this, but I tried to draw it. This is not my drawing. I took it from somewhere. It's steeper. What this means is that movement to the right, movement to gains, has less of an impact on your total well-being, which is on the y-axis, than movement to the right. Now that was exemplified in the opening gamble I gave you. When you think of how happy you would be, you use the word happy, I'm happy to use the word happy, which is a very psychological word. If you think how happy you would be if you gained 1,000 shekels, it makes less of a difference to your happiness than if you imagine how unhappy you would be if somebody took from you 1,000 shekels. The impact of X shekels is larger when you're losing it than when you're gaining it. An expression that appears in the literature, the common cliche is, losses loom larger than gains. The impact of losses is larger than the impact of gains. So there's an asymmetry between what happens on either side of the reference point. In classical utility theory, there is no reference point. Classical utility theory and Bernoulli ignore the question, where are you when you're making that decision? Now, what is, therefore, in this function here, what is this point? If you will, it's something like the absolute zero. Like the absolute zero, say, in temperature. It's not exactly clear what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean, supposing you lost everything. You could be in a situation that's worse than losing everything. You can lose everything and owe. So it could be, if you're pushing it, it could be the maximum that anybody will allow you to owe. Not everybody gets to owe a lot of money. You have to be as rich as Donald Trump, for example, to be in debt to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Most of you will never be that much down because nobody will give you that much to owe. But anyway, it's kind of the absolute zero, and all the action, therefore, doesn't take place close to that point. All the action takes place somewhere on this branch. And with life changes, when you win a little, you lose a little, you basa, you slide back and forth on this branch somehow, and it's not that the curvature is exactly the same everywhere, but when you slide back, you slide on the same curve as when you slide towards gain. Whereas what prospect theory says is, when you're gaining, when you're better off, when things are good for you, you're sliding on this branch, and then the reference point moves. There's a new status quo. You just won the prize, or you just got a raise in salary, or you didn't just get a raise in salary, you just got your salary. And now your portfolio in the bank, if you're so lucky, just went up or just went down, or the value of your house just went up, or just things happen to you, and you adapt to them. They are this invisible variable in the background. And now, when you're faced with a decision, this axis has moved. So the axis, at all points the decisions are made, it's where your present reference point is, and it isn't fixed forever. And when you lose, you're sliding on this. You don't slide back on the same branch where you went up. You slide on a different branch. So, if you will, what this theory says is, if you win 1,000 and lose 1,000, you're not back to square one. You're worse off. Now, again, you won't find that in prospect theory, and I don't want to defend it if you can think of counterexamples, because there are counterexamples, and the way to generate them is to think of gaining 1,000 and losing 1,000 before you have adapted, before you've changed your reference point. So if this can happen before you change your reference point, then you've moved up on a branch and you move down on the same branch because your reference point hasn't changed yet. But very often reference points change between one decision and another. Now, many of Kahneman's intuitions and ideas came from the fact that, unlike Tversky, he was a student of perception and perception, vision. Tversky came from decision theory as a student. His training was in decision theory. Kahneman came from the field of perception and attention. And that's where he won a big name for himself as a reputation, even before he teamed up with Tversky. And he always said that his intuitions about what goes on with respect to money and uncertainty and decision making came from what he knew about perception. And here is an experiment you can do at home that is a very nice demonstration of how it makes a difference where you get to someplace from. So you can do this at home. Maybe you've done it at home. It's a very neat experiment. It's neat to experience what I'm going to tell you, and it's neat to have others experience it because there's something startling about it. So set up 3 bowls of water. Make one cold, doesn't have to be uncomfortably cold. Make one cold so the better line coming. Make one hot, doesn't have to be uncomfortably hot, but makes a difference. And then make one tepid. Mix the hot water with the warm water and mix them up with a spoon, not with your hand. So now you have cold, tepid, hot. Now put your hands in the side bowls and let it stay there for a while. It has to be more than a few seconds. I don't know, 20 seconds. Let your hand stay in the cold water or in the hot water till you adapt, till it becomes comfortable, till, if you will, the temperature reference point changes for the 2 hands. When you put it in the cold, you notice it's cold. When you put it in the hot, you notice it's hot. 20 seconds later, you're comfortable. It's fine. You don't know what the temperature really is. Now take your 2 hands out and put both of them into the tepid water. And your 2 hands will be reporting different sensations to your brain. One of them is going to say, boy, this water is cold, and the other is going to say, boy, this water is hot. And your system too knows that it's the same. But the sensation, and this is biology, this is, you could call it psychology, but the physiology of it is well understood, and you get these different reports. So Kahneman and Tversky invented the following analog. Abe was worth, I think I have a, why did I lose it? I don't know. Does it matter? Yeah, here it is. Abe used to be worth $3 million, and he just found out that due to market changes, he's only worth $2 million today. Benny used to be worth $1 million, and due to market changes, he's worth $1.5 million today. We don't need to get into the question, how can the market affect them so differently? All we have to say is that they're invested differently in the market, right? And the market doesn't at the same time increase you by 50%, decrease you by 50%, but your investment can. So Kahneman and Tversky asked the question, which one of them has more utility? And I hope you agree that 2 million is better than 1.5 million, even though you got there by a sad, sad route. It's better to have 2 million than to have 1.5 million. There's more utility to 2 million than 1.5 million. But we've heard the word happiness here. Which one of them is happier? Clearly the guy whose portfolio just increased and the guy whose portfolio just decreased. So happiness and utility are not the same thing. And Kahneman, by today, this is not part of the Nobel Prize winning effort, but Kahneman by today has made distinctions between several kinds of utility. The one exemplified by this example is what's called decision utility. That's the kind of utility that economic theory talks about, and it's the utility of the final state. And experience utility. Experience utility refers to the process and to the changes and to the fact that in one case you're talking about a plus $1 million, plus $500,000, and in the other case you're talking about minus $1 million. So he makes these distinctions. He's also made another very interesting distinction, which if you want to hear about, you can hear him lecture on it. He has a very nice TED lecture on it. The difference between experienced utility and remembered utility, which has nothing to do with prospect theory, nothing to do with utility theory, nothing to do with the Nobel Prize. It just has to do with distinction that if you seriously look at decision making, you have to make. And the difference between experienced utility and remembered utility is that memory systematically distorts the real thing. How do we know what the real thing is? How do we know what somebody's quote unquote real utility from something is? Kahneman has done it in some of his studies. by measuring it online, by asking people, how happy are you, how happy are you, how happy are you, how happy are you, throughout a period of time. And then when it's all over, he asks them, how happy were you? Now he can compare the how happy were you to the how happy are you, and there are systematic differences, which I will tell you about only because my tongue ran away with me now, because I planned to talk to you about it. But I'll give you his most dramatic study about that. He and Don Rettelmeyer, a practicing physician, studied people undergoing colonoscopies while they were undergoing colonoscopies. Now, all of you look to me too young to have ever done a colonoscopy. Has any of you ever done a colonoscopy? You can wait. Don't rush into it. You can wait. But by the time these kids will have their first colonoscopy, it probably won't hurt at all, because they'll put you under. I mean, the procedure is invasive, but there's no reason why you should suffer as a consequence. But at the time they did the study, people who underwent colonoscopies, just like when you get a shot, you feel the prick, and when you give blood, you feel the prick. When they gave them a colonoscopy, they felt what was happening. It's not life-threatening, they let them suffer. So while the colonoscopy was taking place, they elicited from them that every 10 seconds or so, they had to say on the scale from 1 to 10 how much pain they were experiencing. And therefore, you got a, do I have it among my slides maybe? They got a plot of the running pain. I guess I don't have it among my, but it's so easy to find online. It looks something like this. In other words, the pain goes up, the pain goes down over the period of, say, 10 minutes that the procedure takes in a particular case. Now they compared two kinds of patients. What I'm telling you now could have been done in a very controlled manner in another experiment, which involves plunging your hand in very cold water. Plunging your hand in very cold water, I've never tried it. It's apparently really painful and really not dangerous. So it's a very nice way of torturing somebody. It hurts a lot, and it leaves don't freeze the arm, just make it uncomfortably cold, and it's surprising how quickly it's uncomfortably cold. Below about 12 degrees centigrade, it really hurts. And before it gets to freezing, no tissue damage, no real risk or danger. So anyway, they would have people plunge their hands into very cold water, and then some people could, after a given amount of time, take the hand out, it was all over. And some people spent another minute in water that was during that minute slowly warmed up to a still uncomfortable temperature, but better than the starting point. And then they took their arm out, and then it was over. Now, in the case of the colonoscopy, there were some people whose procedure ended, when the procedure ended, it ended. The measuring thing was pulled out, and it was all over. The pain was over, the exam was over. And for other people, you can only do that if ethics committee give you permission to do that. For other people, they prolonged the exam longer than was necessary in order to be able to do the study. So the colonoscopy exam was over, but the painful equipment that's shoved up your ass in order to do to look inside was kept inside for a while longer. It didn't hurt quite as much as during the procedure, but it wasn't over yet, and then it was pulled out. Now, when I describe it this way, I think it's clear to everybody. The second person had a worse experience than the first person in both cases. Why? Because the second person had the experience that the first person had, and then some. So the first person had a bad experience, and then it was over. And the second person had the same bad experience. As I said, no two colonoscopies are exactly the same, but two baths of water can be exactly the same, and two 10 minutes can be exactly the same. So the second person had the same experience the first person had, and then it wasn't over. And then there was an added tail of an experience that was not as bad as the common experience, but it wasn't over yet. And then they were asked, besides rate how painful this was every 10 seconds while this was going on, how bad was the experience? And guess who gave the higher rating? the group that had the longer experience, even though the longer experience included the shorter experience as a subset. Furthermore, it's not just that people rated the experience. These people don't know about each other. This is what's called a between subject design, not a within subject design. There's no way in the world you would get it in a within subject design. In other words, if you told people at the end of the colonoscopy, okay, the colonoscopy is over now, but because you're a subject in the experiment, we're going to leave it in this state of discomfort for a little bit longer, then we're going to ask you about it. They would absolutely say, this was worse. I wish you had pulled out when you could have, and not subjected me to this extra pain. But when you do a between subject study, they don't know about each other. They look back at the experience. Now, the memory distortion doesn't come from the fact that it was long ago. It was just now. The memory distortion is because of the way that we accumulate, that we build up an integral of what an experience that is built up of different moments, what is that experience in its entirety. And the mechanism Kahneman discovered is as follows. People are grossly insensitive to the duration of the experience, which doesn't mean they can't tell the difference between 10 minutes and an hour, but it means that 10 minutes or even 13 minutes, that's 30% more, doesn't affect their judgment. If something is bad, it hurts at a given level, and it ends after 10 minutes or ends after 13 minutes, they don't say the 13 minutes was worse than the 10 minutes. They give very similar evaluations. So duration it's called duration neglect. Doesn't play a role in your overall evaluation, and here's what plays a role. There are two moments in this experience that seem to predict how you would summarize it in retrospect. The worst moment and the final moment. It's called the peak-end rule. So if you compare two experiences, and both of them say their worst moment is the same, and it happens, say, in minute 5 into a 10-minute colonoscopy, but then one of them ends, and the other ends at a level of 2 on the scale from 1 to 10, not at a level of 8 on the scale from 1 to 10. So you have maybe one person, 8 was the worst, 7 was the last minute, another 8 was the worst, 7 was the 10th minute, but then it went down to a level of 2 and then it was over. The second person rates the entire experience as better. Moreover, when they're not asked for ratings, when you looked at the probability the person will come back for another colonoscopy, the rates are higher in the second group than in the first group. In other words, the first group has more people who say, never again. So it's not about how you use the scale, and it's not about demand characteristics, and it's not about how you understand the task. In truth, you code the experiences in hindsight. It's distorted relative to what in fact happened, and therefore you can get violations, one would almost say, of violations of almost logical imperatives, in that you can rate an experience that includes a very bad experience as a subset, you can rate it as better than the subset in itself. But this was not one of the things I wanted to talk about, because there was no Nobel Prize in that. So as I said, Kahneman likes to sort of, when he's trying to be provocative, say the prospect theory is a theory about nothing. And here's what he says are the values of prospect theory, the ideas. He says prospect theory, you can find counterexamples to it right away. The ideas are robust. The ideas are utility is carried not by where is the prospect theory? Did I lose it? Where is it? You saw it, right? It was there. It's gone. I deleted it. I didn't mean to, but I deleted it. Doesn't matter. You've seen it. You can't take that away from me. So the carriers of utility are not final states. The carriers of utility are changes in state. The changes are computed with respect to a reference point. So decisions are reference dependent, and we saw examples, reference dependent, we saw through the example of who is happy with a guy who guy who just gained less than the other ones got. Those are the ideas that Kahneman says are, are have lasting value besides prospect theory. Now, I will continue to talk with you as long as time allows. I guess I have 90 minutes, right? It's a 90-minute meeting from 1 to 2:30. And I'm going to go through some other of these effects, all of which are in prospect theory. But I just wanted to say, in case we run out of time, I already told you that everything can be found, a lot of things can be found online. Let me also just point out that this talk is based on a paper. This is not a great advantage to you guys because it's in Hebrew. I often bring this as a reference because it's one of the few things in Hebrew. There's a lot. If you want to read about these things in English, you could read Kahneman and Tversky. If you want to read about these things in Hebrew, you can read this paper of mine, which the title of which is the same as this lecture title, that Psychological Insights That Won a Nobel Prize in Economics, and you can find it. It was published in the Riv'on Lekalkala, but you can also find it in the Rationality Center's list of publications. So if I have to stop at a point where you wish I said more, then you can go and read it there, and now I will say as much as time will allow me to say. So let's look at some of the major psychological insights that stood behind the prospect theory and the work that won the Nobel Prize in Economics. So we already know what reference point is. It's the point with respect to which changes are computed. I said that it's often the status quo, but not necessarily. Let me give you an example where the reference point may be not the status quo. Supposing you are working somewhere and your union goes on strike, and your union is promising you that if you persist in the strike, you're going to get a raise of 1,000 shekels. And the strike fails. You may very well feel that you lost rather than that you stayed in the same place, because you may have, in the course of the days of the strike, changed your reference point. You may have taken a promise, a goal, a virtual reality, and if you've already engaged in imagining how nice it would be when you get this raise in salary and you've already started spending more than you have and all of these things, you may already have changed your reference point so that when the strike yields you, say, 500 shekels raise, you don't feel like you got a raise of 500, you feel like you lost 500 because your reference point has changed. Now, there is no comprehensive theory of reference points, but heuristically I've told you what reference points are. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is the name of the phenomenon that the branch of value theory that's in the loss domain is steeper than the branch in the gains domain, or what I call losses loom larger than gains. The impact of X dollars is larger as a loss than it is as a gain. You have one example, it's the fact that you are reluctant to accept a gamble for plus 1,000, minus 1,000, but there are examples galore. Yeah, the fourfold pattern. Let me show you what the fourfold pattern is. The fourfold pattern is this. Where is the fourfold pattern? Here it is. This is the fourfold pattern. So the fourfold pattern is about the fact that what other things make a difference when you're making decisions. What other things make a difference vis-a-vis utility theory? I'm going to ask you questions now that you're going to compare to yourself rather than comparing two different groups, and let's see how we're doing. So I'm going to ask you, what would you rather? Would you rather participate in a gamble where you have an 80% chance of winning 1,000 shekels or nothing? Now you can't implement that with a fair coin, but there's no difficulty implementing it with something else. Put some marbles in a jar, put 80% black marbles, 20% white marbles, mix them up, draw a marble blindly, you've just implemented a gamble that gives you an 80% chance for 1,000, okay? So, would you rather have that, or would you rather have 750 shekels? Now we're gonna do a show of hands. Who prefers 750 shekels? Flat out, to an 80% chance of getting 1,000 shekels. Raise your hands. Raise them straight, because that's what you're looking at. Who has the opposite preference? Who prefers the gamble? Straight, 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 straight. Two? You're not even sure, but you are sure.
I'm sure, yes.
You're sure, okay. So, most people prefer the sure thing to the gamble. Now I'm gonna ask you a different question. Supposing the probabilities were not 80% versus certainty, 1,000 with probability 80% versus 750 with certainty. Supposing I said to you the following. You're going to choose between two gambles. The gambles are going to be gambles. I mean, there's going to be a high probability of getting nothing in both of them. You can have a 20% chance of getting 1,000 versus a 25% chance of getting 750. You got it? Sometimes I prepare it in writing, but it's simple enough. It's what?
The alternative is both is not getting
That's right,
anything.
that's right. So you can either choose pick a white marble out of that 20% white, 80% black marbles in a jar, and then you'll get 1,000. Or we can have another jar where the probability is higher, it's 25%, but the prize is lower, it's 750. So let's think about it, and let's do a show of hands. Who in this case would go for the 1,000 with probability 20%? Raise your hand straight. And who would go for the 700 with 25% probability? Interesting. What's interesting is that you did not choose the way a majority of subjects choose. So I have to tell you how a majority of subjects choose. A majority of subjects here reverse their preference. A majority of subjects are not. Oh, sorry. No. You chose it. You chose the 1,000 in both cases. I asked the question.
No.
I asked the. No, you certainly should choose the 1,000 in the second chance. So maybe let me see. I'll look. It's what?
In the first one, we chose the determined one.
Sorry. So you did do what everybody does. Yopi. So in the first case, you preferred the sure thing, and in the second case, you preferred. I can't say the gamble. Both are gamble. You preferred the gamble that has 1,000 in it. Now I will show you why this is inconsistent with utility theory. It's not inconsistent with prospect theory in ways that I'm not going to go through the algebra or why, but I want to give you an intuition. Why for Homo economicus, why for econs, why for those idolized people that I started my talk with, why this is unacceptable. Your answer to the first question is acceptable. Your answer to the second question is acceptable. The two answers, anybody who chose 750 in the first case and the gamble with 1,000 in the second case, any of you who did both of these things, it's not all of you, because you chose. It's not about the two that chose the 1,000 in the first case. It's about those who chose the 750 in the first case and the 1,000 in the second case, which is most of you. You are violating utility theory, and let me show you in what way. The third way of presenting what I'm going to call the same question, it didn't feel like the same question, did it? The first question felt quite different than the second question. But I'm going to make them kind of feel the same by doing the following trick. Okay, I say to you, I am going to present you with the with the first question. I am going to give you a chance to choose between 750 for sure and an 80% chance at 1,000. I'm going to give you that opportunity. And you kind of remember. You sort of know what you would do if presented with that opportunity because you've thought about it already. But I'm going to make it a little bit harder this time. I'm not going to give this opportunity to all of you, but rather we're going to toss a coin. And you're going to have to toss it 2 times in a row on the side of your choice. What's the probability of doing that? Exactly, right? I could have done any other thing with probability 25. I want to say, I'm going to give you a gamble which you have the 25% chance of passing successfully. If you don't pass it successfully, bye-bye. If you do pass it successfully, I'm going to give you an opportunity at that first question. Now, what would you do in this case? Let's do a show of hands. Who said, למה את מבלבלת את המוח? Who said, what's all this story about? You're going to give me this opportunity again. I'm going to choose the same way again. Who thinks that? Raise your hand. Straight hand, because you're look. Nobody sees
the same thing?
the same answer that I gave you last time you asked me. Between 750 for sure and 1,000 with probability 80%. You've got my answer on record, and don't. I think I believe them all. So who said more or less that? Straight hand. Who says oh?
What's the choice that we're being given initially?
What?
What's the choice that we're being given initially? You're asking us whether.
750.
No,
You don't have any choice
about
initially.
coin toss.
You don't have any choice initially. You have a barrier to pass.
Okay.
No choice. I'm going to put a barrier in front of you, and you'll have a probability of 1 in 4 of passing it.
Okay.
If you don't pass the barrier, you're out of the game, and I'm giving you no choice. If you pass the barrier, I'm going to give you a familiar choice. Question. Who of you thinks that the barrier story is immaterial? You've already thought about what you prefer between 750 for sure and 1,000 with probability 80%. It's very sad if you don't pass the barrier, but if you do pass the barrier, you see no reason to say anything different than you've ever said. I think most of you said, yeah, that's me. And which of you does the following, which Kahneman and Tversky said people don't do? People don't change their term was the frame in which they get questions. Frame is the presentation mode. Remember I told you that if I ask you a question about gambles, you do not integrate them with what you have unless either I ask you to or circumstances are so extreme that you do it spontaneously. But normally you do not reframe the question. And most people don't do what I'm going to do for you now, which is, well, if there's a barrier I have to pass before I reach that question, then even if I say that I'm choosing the 750, my chance of getting it is really only 25%, because I may never get the opportunity. So what's the chance I'll go home today with 750? 25%. I have first of all to pass the barrier, and then I have to say I want the 750. So my chance of going home with what I want are 25%. What is your chance of going home with 1,000? Well, first I have to pass the barrier. Chance of that is 25%. Then there's another obstacle. I have to get a white marble out of that jar. The chance of that is 20%. The combined chance, therefore, say 80%. The combined chance of an obstacle is 25% and then a gamble is 80% is 20%. So you do not say to yourself, in fact Maya is suggesting, asking me whether I want to go home with a probability of 25% holding 750 in my pocket, or I want to go home holding 1,000 in my pocket, which the probability of which is only 20%. Have I managed to convince you that that's in fact another description of the state of affairs? So, under 2 different descriptions, the 2 different gambles don't seem equally attractive. Under the description that combined the probabilities and gave you the bottom line, you prefer a 20% chance at 1,000 to a 25% chance at 750. But if I separate the probability into a prior obstacle and then different probabilities, it feels different, and you answer differently. So, utility theory doesn't allow that. In utility theory, if somebody prefers A to B, that's a general axiom of utility theory. If you prefer A to B, and then somebody says to you, okay, what do you prefer? A 25% chance to get A, or a 25% chance to get B, you should give the same answer as you gave to what do you prefer between A and B, because the probabilities here are held constant, so in a sense they're irrelevant. That's one of the axioms of utility theory. And Kahneman Tversky said, but people are not like that. That's not what people say. And as you see, you haven't said so either. Okay, so that's now I'm going to ask you another question. So we've done the difference between this and this. I haven't given you the formal terms. When somebody prefers a gamble to what's called its certainty equivalent, that's the technical term, which is its expected value. If somebody prefers a gamble to its expected value, kal v'chomer, if somebody prefers a gamble to less than its expected value, yes, then that's called risk seeking. You prefer to get a certain value on average in an uncertain way than to get it for sure. That's risk, by the way. The word risk, as it's used in economics and in utility theory, is not what's called in Hebrew sakana. It's not danger. It's risk is almost equivalent to uncertainty, to ivadaut. So risk aversion, a very common term in economics, means no more and no less than if you can get a gamble or a sure thing that is the expected value of that gamble, you prefer the sure thing. You'd rather get 500 shekels as 500 shekels than get 500 shekels as the average of 50% to get 1,000 and 50% to get nothing. If you prefer the gamble, you're risk seeking. If you prefer the sure thing, you're risk averse. Those are terms in economic theory. And what Kahneman Tversky said prospect theory does, as I told you, I'm never even going to present you with prospect theory, with the theory itself. There's a whole paper about it. You could find it online. It's quite technical. It was published in Econometrica. It's full of math and it's quite technical. And since Kahneman says it's a theory about nothing, I'm going to spare you hearing the theory, but I'm going to give you what he says is the essence. The essence is that prospect theory says that things reverse themselves when you go from choice between things with high probabilities up to 100%, up to 100%, such as 750 for sure. You get reversals if you move to small probabilities. Even though you can get the small probabilities in this technique that I described to you as an obstacle to the high probabilities. Now, another feature of התבנית המרובעת, of the quadruple pattern, is the reversal between what happens in the domain of gains and in the domain of losses. And again, all I'm going to ask you to do is use your imagination. Here's a question. Remember what prospect theory is about? Binary monetary gambles with known probabilities. Here comes one. What would you rather do? Toss a coin between losing 1,000 shekels or losing nothing at all, or for sure, pay up 450 shekels. All you need to do now is think about it, and I'm going to ask you. So first of all, let's be clear. I mean, let's not hide the fact. I gave you a sure loss that is smaller than the expected loss from the gamble. The expected loss from the gamble is 500 shekels. You're not going to pay the expected loss because you're only going to do it once. You're either going to pay 1,000 or nothing at all. So 500 is not on the table. But if you don't like the idea of possibly paying 1,000, you can pay 450 for sure, no gamble. That's the question. Now I'm going to ask you, again, imagine tossing land on the side of your choice. Baruch Hashem. I mean, you know, Maya has just imposed this. She's asking you whether you want makaba tusik or skira bapanim. I mean, what kind of choice? You can't give, by the way, choices like that as an experiment. There are a lot of the things that I did that people are allowed to do an experiment. You can't ask subjects nowadays questions like that, even if you got their prior permission, even if you tell them this is a study about choice and about gambles, and some of the gambles will involve losses and some will involve gains, and blah 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 blah. You have to get approval of ethics committees to do this. Sometimes they give it, most often they don't give it. But this is hypothetical. I can do whatever I want. And even though it's hypothetical, I think I can get you to feel how unpleasant this choice is. It's not a nice choice. But you're choosing between two bad things. Or in other words, you're choosing in the domain of losses. You're choosing between a sure loss and the probable loss whose expected value is higher, and it's up to you. And after all this patter, don't help me and don't hinder me. Don't say she wants me to do A, I'll do B, and don't say she'll want me to do A, I'll do A. Just ask yourself, which of these two unappealing things is more appealing? Giving me now 450, as I said, I take checks, don't tell me hey lachem, or tossing the coin. And now we're going to do a show of hands. Who prefers take the 450 and never want to see you again? Raise your hand. Yad v'shara. Yad v'shara. Who says I'll take my chances? Boy, this is bad. That's the common pattern. The common pattern is in the domain of gains you prefer the sure thing to the gamble. In the domain of losses you prefer the gamble to the sure thing. So there's a flip. There's a flip from column to column. There's a flip from row to row. And to show you the last cell, I won't even do a show of hands. I'll just describe it. The last cell talks about, would you rather pay 450 shekels with a probability of 25% or pay 1,000 shekels with a probability of 20%? And now it feels completely different. Now most people, we can do a show of hands, but since I like to dwell on it and tell you, think about it so on, most people reverse their preference from here. So we have two things that reverse preferences. One of them is, are we talking about positive things or negative things? And you may well ask what happens with mixed gambles. And the answer is mixed gambles don't fall into the quadruple pattern. There are answers what happens in mixed gambles. You can get them from prospect theory. But I'm not going to say anything about them because they don't fall as neatly into this pattern. In this pattern says if you have a no loss gamble, just gains, then things are flipped with respect to if you did the same numbers and just changed the sign in the loss domain. And if you have choices between a sure thing and a gamble, you get a reversal of preferences if you make both of them probabilistic, and in particular it's not enough to make both of them probabilistic, you make both of them with small probabilities. I could have made them probabilistic by making the 750 not 100%, but 90%. It wouldn't work. I had to go down to 25%. So low probabilities. That's what's called the quadruple pattern, and it embodies several principles that Kahneman and Tversky said were psychological principles, and that utility theory can take into account. So let's see what we have. I think we more or less have everything. So we have reference point, loss aversion, the fourfold pattern. We have you know what risk-seeking versus risk aversion is. You know what the difference between these things in the domain of gains versus losses. Certainty versus small probability. Reflection effect is just the fact that the top is a mirror is a mirror image of the bottom, and the right is a mirror image of the left. So we've gone through the reflection effect. Certainty effect is the fact that it's different if you use probabilities in both of them, or if in one case there's certainty. Certainty, said Kahneman and Tversky, has more impact than it should in the following sense. 100% is 10% more than 90%. And 30% is 10% more than 20%. But 100% is certainty, and all the rest are not. And certainty has a mystique of its own. Certainty has more impact than any other raise in probabilities that doesn't bring you to certainty. There's something about certainty, and they have lots of clever experiments that I don't have time to show you, but they're as simple as the things I did show you, that to show that, well, in effect, we saw it in one of them. When I took that 25% and turned it into an obstacle, and therefore left you with a choice that had the certainty in it, it felt different than when I combined them. There's something about certainty, even though Kahneman first he said, actually, there never is certainty about anything. If I say to you now, I'll give you 750 for sure, we can do away with questions of trust. That uncertainty that comes from sometimes people mistrust experimenters, sadly for good reasons, because sometimes experiments are not trustworthy. That's a different thing than the thing that when I finish the sentence, that Iranic atomic bomb may fall on this room, and it's all over, and I don't have to pay up 750. In other words, there's so much uncertainty in the world, not just interpersonal untrustworthiness, that saying that something is certain is just a figure of speech. But we understand it. We mean when we say for sure, something will happen for sure, modulo all the things that recede into the background and we don't take them into account. But of course, as I'm sure you realize, nothing is really for sure. Or as somebody, who said, Einstein, somebody said, only taxes and death are 100%. Okay, so we know what the certainty effect. Framing effect. I told you what framing effect is. Framing effect is how do you respond to changes in the way a question is presented? And the answer is it can make a difference of preference reversal. The classic example in this topic, which I gave you an example of, but the classical example is what's called the Asian disease. Have you ever heard of the Asian disease? Quickly, here's what the Asian disease is. You are Minister of Health, and your scientists in your ministry come and say, winter is approaching, and a new and virulent strain of flu virus is threatening us. The Hong Kong flu, the Madagascar flu, somebody should someday say the Marseille flu. They always go out in Europe where they give these horrible names. We're going to call it the Marseille flu is threatening the country. You better do something. And they propose two programs. And one of the programs is described, is framed in slightly different terms than the other. So since I didn't bring it in writing, or maybe I did, let me quickly say it to you. They say to you the following. Yeah, here it is. Here is the question. Here is the question. If you're not going to take action, 90 people are expected to die. But we can give you two programs to combat this impending catastrophe. If you use one of them, 60 people will die. If you use the other, there's a 2/3 chance that nobody will die. 2/3 chance, not a single death. But there's a 1/3 chance that all 90 will die. Okay? So that's the question. You're Minister of Health. Don't do nothing because then 90 people will die for sure. I just told you. That's for sure. That's where your scientists are telling you. They just said that Mexico was going to be hit by the worst hurricane in recorded history, and the damage was going to be the worst in recorded history, and then the hurricane hit and the damage wasn't the worst. So people say things, but we understand the rule of the game. The scientists are saying, you don't do nothing, 90 people will die. Program A, only 60 people will die. Program B, we're not sure. There's a 2/3 probability that nobody will die, and there's a 1/3 probability that all 90 will die, or vice versa. I think 2/3 probability that 90 will die, and 1/3 probability that nobody will die. Let's do a show of hands. Who prefers program A? 60 will die. You're raising your hand? No. Who prefers the uncertain program? Yofi, בדיוק like the literature says, but here is what the literature also says. If you take this same, this is where I really need to root. You take this same problem, and instead of talking, as I just did, in terms of how many people will die, you talk in terms of how many people will be saved, and you get a reversal. So here's the alternative formulation. The alternative formulation is the alternative formulation is, if you take program A, you will save 30 lives. Is there a difference between 60 people will die and 32 people will be saved? If you take program B, there is a, whatever the numbers are, 2/3 probability that all 90 will be saved, and there's a 1/3 probability that nobody will be saved. Just by describing how many people will be saved rather than how many people will die, even though all of you know enough arithmetic to sum up these two and know that that's the 90 that your scientists say will die otherwise. Just framing it in terms of lives saved rather than lives lost reverses the preference. Now, we know why. We have already seen that the general principle is that in the domain of gain, people are risk averse. In the domain of gain, people prefer the sure thing to the gamble. In the domain of losses, people prefer the gamble to the sure thing. Da'aka, as they say in Aramaic, this is not even Hebrew, this is Aramaic, that in this case, you're not moving from the domain of gains to the domain of losses. You're moving from a description using words from the domain of gains to a description using words from the domain of losses. When I asked you about those bad gambles and those good gambles, the real thing was terrible in the case of. Here we're describing the same things. We're using different terminology. I don't have to, this you'll have to believe me. The trickier one is the one you did. The trickier one is getting most people to prefer the gamble here. When it's the sure thing, people prefer the program that saves 60 to the program that may save nobody. So just changing the terminology. That's a framing effect, but we've seen other framing effects. Listen, I'm keeping you beyond time. It's nice of you to stay, but let's stop here. Anybody who wants to read more or hear more, the literature is full of fun papers and the internet is full of exciting talk, so go for it. Are there any questions? Hamanti Yochai? Thank you for listening, and
מי יעזור לי לשחרר את הממורי סטיק שלי?
כי מחקת סדרה.
באמת לא נורא, את יודעת כמה וריאציות יש לי?
לא, כי צריכים למסך אבל יש
נכון, כיוון שנמחק לי הדרף, הייתי צריכה להגיד לא נפרד.
זה כמו שאמרת, רק רוצה לבחור את זה. היום ממש נחמד.
טוב, תראי, מירב שמעה את זה הרבה פעמים. כן, אז את יודעת שזה מבטיח. שלום, מאיה.
היא באמת אמרה שהיא שווה.
כמו מה, אולי נפגע אם היא תהיה לך מדינת ישראל או לא טוב לכלכלת מדינת ישראל, זה לא שומע שאלה יחסתם, תצליחו להתנהגו.
כן, אלא אם כולם יודעים מה רכב, שכולם יודעים מה השני, יש חדות שמקבלים,
אבל השאלה היא, זה אגב אותו ברח שלהם אפילו, אני לא משתתפת בו, כי אני ממש לא מרגישה אני לא מרגישה שיש לי דעה. אבל I have an idea שזה לא היה רעיון כל כך טוב להוריד את המע"מ. כי היא הכניסה אותה מדינה כזאת
אני יודעת.
אנחנו לא מרגישים, בגלל שאנחנו מע"מ, אנחנו לא מרגישים אותה משתי סיבות. לא יודע, נכון, הנה אתה מהקרבה פה, את לא מרגישה שאני אז אם את רוצה להיות נחמדה, אז יש לא רק זה הורדת המע"מ, הורדת המע"מ באופן הצרכן, לא להרגיש שזה, והקבוצה של המדינה כן טוב. אם מישהו היה בא לשאול.
גם לא יריחו את הקולונוסקופיה. לא, כי הוא השאיר אותי וגם זה...
לא,
בחיים עכשיו, אבל למה? זה מגביל לך לחזור לעשות.
אתה יודע עכשיו, את גלשת עכשיו לשאלה שהיא בתחום האנושי.
לא גלשת.
את גלשת עכשיו לשאלה זה לא שאני חולשת, אבל זה נשאר. זה רק יועיל כטכניקה. קודם כל בואי נגיד ואני שילמתי, לטובתה. את אומרת, אבל זה לעשות עליהם סיבוב.
ומישהו זה חשבון.
לא היו שלנו, ביום ראשון, מאוד קשה לעשות דברים שרק...
כי את העברת את החשבון שלך, לא הייתה אחראית שלך לעירייה,
לא הייתה נקודה אבל אם היה חלילה מתברר שיש רופאים שעושים את זה, עוד לא בוער להם. היו מביאים אותם לפני ועדת אתיקה רפואית. מה תודה רבה? הלכת באמצע, אתה היה
את יודעת כמה ישיבות יש לי?
אני לא חייבת.
נכנסתי לכמעט שעה וכל כך הייתי מבסוט, פתאום אני מנותק. לא, זה היה לי כזה להתנתק
באמת ככה?